The first time I hung a jersey, or I hung a couple of them, was rehanging them. They already had a handle, they were coming loose, they needed re-wedging and refitting. And I just tuned them up and they were fine. But when it came to doing vintage axes, it was an extra factor, it gave me concern. I looked for advice. I couldn't find anything. I saw people with them done, didn't see them working on it. Problem is, those lugs. The lugs enter the shoulder before the rest of the bottom of the axe does. Second problem, they got an extra tall eye. So you have to make sure you've got enough tenon before you start working on them. Some solutions I found online were to bend the lugs outward. Oh, you could do that. They filed out the insides or ground them out, or they just cut them off completely. And that's a little bit drastic. That's not what I want to do. So I got one of these vintage, this I call the pig. The pig has really extremely flat shoulders. Do you see that? There's almost no shoulder on there. That's tip number one. Remember that. Tip number two is when you look at the eye, you've got that long, almost flat part of the eye. This is going to be easier than I thought. These make sense. All right, now the way that you work is to keep that flat. Where the lug's going to go, you want to keep that flat. So you can just use any method you want. I've got such bad arthritis that I have trouble with a knife. I'd use a spoke shave here, and I could. To begin, I could use a spoke shave. But I use that little half hatchet. The bigger, heavier one, this is a hewing hatchet. They work really well. And they're always right there. I've got a pile of them on the bench, and so I use those. Well, my favorite tool is always going to be that four in hand. If I had a big rasp, I would use it, but the four in hand works fine. Just be careful you don't roll it. You're only keeping a spot there for that little chevron to come down. And remember that word chevron because that's the mark it's going to make. Here I'm just using a big a flat chisel. I have a little bit of trouble controlling those because my fingers don't work the way they used to. So the big heavy heads of those hatchets, that really helps me. And they're razor sharp. And that little file, I don't like working on that. Just that my joints get sore after a while. All right, so you do it just like anything else. You start to get that tenon to fit inside your eye. But now the problem's going to be is you're coming down into the flare of the shoulder, right? That's why the shoulder's got to be really flat. And as that advances, you're going to need it to meet the flare. And it's meeting the flare before everything else on the axe does. So you just keep up. Go slow, keep up, and you got to understand you're kind of channeling a hollow out. That middle part of the eye is is going to be more recessed than the rest of your tenon. You know what I mean? You got kind of a groove. I mean, a big, wide, flat groove, and it's just really small. So keep it as tight as you can. I'm warning you, don't jack around with that tenon too much. If that tenon's loose, you're going to have problems. That's going to come off. And that's what's going to happen on the first hang. I'm going to hang this twice in this video. The first time, I'm just doing my dangdest. Keep that tight. And so I'm going really slow. I'm taking just tiny bits of material away at a time. With the broad axe, the half hatchet, the whatever I got. I think I'm even going to bring out a box hatchet here just to show off that I got one. I got one of those little miniature ones. That's kind of smaller. There it is. I'm honing it up. And it's whatever you want. It's just stay flat to that tenon. Remember what the eye shape was that you're going to fit that into. Stay flat to that. And then you work the front and back where it's rounded there, where the rounded part of your egg shape is. You work that normally as you would any axe. If that starts to show curl, you start to trim that too. But you're focused on that lug. And here I'm showing that you do it at an angle like that, it's going to take away the shoulder for you. It's going to bring the shoulder down. Except I make a mistake here. I'm trying to actually save the hump of the shoulder. And that's part of the problem, what's going to happen later here in a minute. But look how tight I keep it. I'm barely able to get that off because I'm putting that on very close tolerances. And so I was impressed at how tight I was getting it. And it still isn't enough. You get that? I'm making that as tight as I can make it. and it wasn't enough to keep that head from walking. And if you try to put a barrel wedge in the top, good luck with that, because the barrel wedge is not going to go down far enough. You've got that extra, eye height. You've got to get this nice and tight. And then you're going to do a trick with the wedge. That's going to be my secret weapon here. How you wedge this. All right, now look at this. I don't want to jack around with that tenon, but my axe head is not, my face of my axe is not in alignment with the handle. Well, you got that great big fat handle, right? That's what I always think of it as. My handle's giant. I'm going to thin it anyway. Why don't I thin it so that I change the orientation of that axe handle? Leave the tenon alone. I got the tenon exactly where I want it. If I start taking a little off the right, a little off the left in the back, and start to try to make it so I can turn the head, my tenon's getting smaller and looser, and I cannot wedge it. I'm not going to have fudge factor here. So that's the way I'm looking at it, right? You know, I'm not an expert. If you got better advice, please comment, because other people look at this, and I'm not going to argue with you. I'm looking for answers too. Okay, because I don't know where this is. If you've got a trick, show us. All right, so I'm getting the handle. All I'm doing there is that shows me where the kerf is. The kerf is pretty well lined up in that tenon. So I'm going to use that, and then I put that little ruler in there so I can eyeball it. Did I get the axis of the handle shifted enough with a spoke shave and with that belt sander? Because once in a while I like hand tools, but sometimes I just don't have time for that. I can go get the belt sander. I've got one, so I use it. Now there, look at that. It's in alignment with the handle now. And I didn't mess with the tenon. I don't want to take more material off that tenon. I'm telling you, it's going to come down to wedging. I've got it sitting where I want it, and all I'm doing is checking that the back of the pole is aiming for the. I mean, it's one way. It's one way you can square up the head, is to see if that's going to the back of the grip there. And I'm checking the depth. What I'm worried here is that's still not coming out, and I'm almost down on the shoulder. I'm going to have to flatten the shoulder more and go down. I keep measuring. I luck out. I end up with maybe a half to 3/4 of an inch. On the second hang, I found out I can bring it down farther, but I've really got to take that shoulder down. The hump in the shoulder has got to be flat. Remember the vintage axe that I showed in the beginning. Bonus tip: if you've got a puppy that eats your socks, just use your little hewing hatchet there to chop off a chunk of that sock that's still good, and you slip that on your hand like a sleeve, and see this handle had been finished. I don't want to get it all smudged up inside of that piece of tractor belt. What do they call that thing? That belt? It's a machine belt, whatever it is, auger belt or whatever you want to call it. That just protects the axe from getting crushed by the metal. And I can't get the magnet things to work. I keep ending up having to pick them up off the floor, so I'm not using the magnet things anymore, the rubber guards. You know how this goes. We're going to file, and we'll just do the stuff we normally do here. Let me bust through it real quick. Look, this is sharpening the head. It's not hafting the head. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. Filed it to below 20. It didn't get down to 18, so it's just a little loose on 20. Stoned out the file marks. Sanded it out with like 600 grit paper. Put a little micro bevel on it, and then honed it, or then stropped it. Went out to test the axe. And this is where I ran into some problems. This is why I'm going to have to do it twice. There goes the council tool. That's what I'm comparing it to. It half sleek. There was no comparison. It just blows the council tool away. But bam! Goes in there good. And it was fine. And I'm very happy, very pleased. But you gotta push it. You just hung it. So what do you do with the hung axe? You go out and beat on it. Whoops. I noticed the head had walked. I saw it moving, so I gave it a knock and got it back on there. But that, and the fact it was only 10 degrees out, and hickory doesn't like cold, and popped it. So I went back in, went through the same routine, took that shoulder flatter. I went flatter with it. And then I really married that up. I wanted that to be absolutely tight. And then it dawned on me, here's my tip. And I'm figuring that's part of the gap that's on the inside. No matter how tight you get that at the bottom, you're going to be bringing it up into a taper. It's going to taper out. It's going to flare out. What if you leave the middle of your wedge, mid wedge, a little thicker than you do the front and back? You already are going to be using a taller wedge than you usually do to get to the bottom. Leave the middle of the wedge thicker than you do in the front and back of the eye. Just a little bit to fill that trough. By golly, I think I'm onto something. And don't short wedge this. Go 3/4 for sure. Try to get as close down there as you can. You're filling up a lot of room inside that head. It works. I know it's a very common complaint in forums going back, I don't know how far in history. People have a jersey, they hang a jersey, have a common complaint, it walks on them, comes off. You know, I don't like metal wedges in the first place, but I thought about using them here, except what are they going to reach? Step wedges and barrel wedges are not going to go very far down that very, very tall eye. And they would work if the sides of your tenon matched the sides of your eye, but they don't. They made room for a lug. I think I got it anyway. I think I did. I've been beating it up. It's not moving. And if it does move, I'll give you an update later. Let me know in the comments, what's that tip worth to you? Is it something that you can use? Let me know.